Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty with Marc and Brian. So we've got some really good topics to hit on. And before we get started into our very first topic, big shout out to East Brother Beer Company for being the show's sponsor. Today we're drinking their oatmeal stout. They're located in Point Richmond on 1001 Canal Boulevard, and great location, ping pong, arcade games.
Lots of board games.
Yeah, sports TV. I think they have bocce ball, food trucks. Awesome place to hang out, especially on a weekend. Especially with this Bay Area heat. Definitely go down, have a few beers, enjoy the time.
And depending on the time you go, they're going to have some really cool food trucks there. Gourmet food trucks, typically, anywhere from those gourmet Mexican food trucks to gourmet hamburgers and things of that nature. But really cool place to be.
Yeah. So our very first topic here is we're going to get into the mega measure. So there's a lot of talk going on right now of a potential measure or mega measure of $100 billion to basically build infrastructure here in the Bay Area. So Brian, what's your first take on this?
Well, my first take would be that it would be a great idea. That, again, what we were talking about yesterday, I think any type of measure that is going to improve the infrastructure. Again, we're talking about roads and public transportation, or at least that's what we think, because the measure is actually pretty vague. In my opinion, creates different jobs, although it does create traffic while they're doing all of these infrastructure improvements. I think in the long run, it's overall a good thing. We were going back and forth over this. In fact,
in our pre-show planning, and one of the issues I have with this is the horrible spending with many infrastructure projects, and how politicians use these infrastructure projects to really pitch how many jobs that they're going to bring to a certain region because of this money coming in. And one of the problems that we see with many infrastructure jobs throughout the nation is that you have these large contractors that get these jobs, and they're not really hiring anyone else because they already have the people on board and they're doing these massive projects anyway. So that's one of the problems that I see. And then, of course, we just had Regional Measure 3 that increased the toll bridge to basically fund additional infrastructure, remodeling, retrofit for roads and for the bridges. And so at what point do we need to have another infrastructure on $100 billion? And how many years is this going to last for? Who's going to pay for it? And then
just to preface things, so it sounds really great and pie in the sky when the measure is initially proposed. However, when you look at the measure, it's extremely vague, as I pointed out earlier on. It doesn't necessarily say where it's going to go, or for that matter, how it's even going to be raised, whether it's going to be through property owners, through increases in their bonds and assessments, or it'll be some type of other tax or fundraising. So it's again, I think it's one of those things like we talked about in previous shows where a lot of people are running for office, and it's one of those platforms that they like to get behind. It tends to be a little bit ambiguous. It does tend to overpromise, but it doesn't really have a lot of detail. So for now, for me, it sounds like it could potentially be a good idea. I'm going to preface that with, though, depending on what specific type of infrastructure it's spent on. Again, in my opinion, it should be spent on public transportation infrastructure that would, again, create easier ways to get into the workforce as opposed to getting onto the freeway and congesting that even further. Because again, this was something Marc and I are talking about, how just expanding freeways as part of the infrastructure doesn't necessarily help traffic, because it just tends to get more people to buy cars and get on the freeway, therefore increasing the congestion.
There's a great YouTube video for everyone to follow up on after watching this video, and it's called How to Fix Traffic. And they basically cover the study that was done in Texas, where they expanded a freeway from like 4 lanes to something ridiculous like 18 lanes. And it was all straightaway. But what happened was their initial idea when they expanded it was to reduce traffic. And instead they had the same amount or a little bit more traffic, and it was taking an hour and 45 minutes to travel 30 miles.
Now, keep in mind, that's Texas. You could go really wide because they got so much space.
The reason why I bring this up is because this type of study ended up, people were studying the reason why this was happening, and they actually determined or created a formula on how they can track the amount of traffic on an highway. So for everyone in the Bay Area, you've all noticed, and it's very annoying to all of us because it's still fairly brand new, those on-ramp stoplights, and many people don't understand why they're there. Well, that type of technology and those stoplights at on-ramps came out of the study done down in Texas, and it's basically limiting the amount of traffic that can go onto the freeway at once, which would help reduce the amount of travel time on the highways.
Yeah, so in case you're ever wondering why there are those stoplights, it's for that specific reason, where if the money is just spent on widening the freeways, they found it doesn't actually help the traffic problem at all.
And we don't have the space here in the Bay Area, so that would be the problem. And the idea is they want to copy what Los Angeles is doing, 120 billion over a 40-year period. And just to finish up, I mean, 40 years is a long time. Los Angeles is going to change. How effective is that 120 billion going to be over 40 years? So 100 billion in the Bay Area over how many years?
Right now, it's a great pie in the sky idea without a whole lot of legs behind it.
Yeah. So we'll see how they actually finalize this, and then I guess we'll have another opinion after that. So our second topic is the retail market. So retail commercial. I don't think this is big news to anyone unless you've been living underneath a rock, but you've noticed a lot of retail stores basically disappearing little by little. A lot of smaller boutique losing out, but also big stores. I mean, look at what we are seeing with you have Kmart, you have Sears, you have Payless, you have all these different big stores that have been around for many years that are completely disappearing or cutting back a lot of their business and eliminating a lot of their retail. And one of the big issues that's causing it is the fact that most people are going to online retailers.
And to preface things, the topic was, or what was that a lot of these retail box stores are going out of business because the prices of real estate are becoming so high. But as we were bringing out, I don't think it's necessarily just a function of that as much as it is that online sales like Amazon are really taking away from retailers, especially the big box stores, because it's so convenient to buy things online through Amazon, Alibaba, or things of that nature. And again, we were discussing this yesterday. It really depends on the specific type of retail, because there are specific types of retail that are still booming.
Yeah. And you actually see this with different development companies that specialize in buying malls. I mean, we look at malls across America and you just see malls just empty, deserted, with nothing going on. It's because historically malls have always survived off of retail, but now you have companies, development companies, buying malls and converting them more into experiences.
In fact, just to kind of segue off, you said a couple of years ago, about 10 years ago, one of my clients, a guy named Barry Cromartie, who was the planner at city planner in Emeryville, this was a phenomenon they had brought out. Actually, it was more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And the phenomenon is that these big malls, these mega malls where you go in and you're buying retail, the experience was going away, and they were mainly becoming more of these boutique, open air walkable malls where you can walk through, stroll, get coffee, get different types of pastries, because it was that type of experience that you would only be able to get from going outside. If you're just going to buy stuff, clothes, shoes even, or more importantly, like electronics, you could do that online so much more efficiently. In fact, video games, for example, you could just download them nowadays as opposed to going and buying the discs. And so you'll see a lot of those types of electronic stores slowly beginning to disappear.
Well, speaking of video games, Google has their brand new system that they're launching.
Really? Oh, yeah, I didn't even hear about that.
It's a membership program. It's like $15 a month, and you have access to older games licensed. And there's no disc. You can play on any mobile device, no matter how.
Well, I think the whole Netflix model has really shown and paved the way for a lot of different people, because it's such an innocuous monthly fee, whether it's $8 a month, $9 a month, $10 a month, or $15 a month, and people just leave it on. And when the entrepreneur who's doing that, like a Google or now Disney, they're going to have a streaming service here really soon.
Yep.
When they have such a huge subscribership. You just have this base income every month that, just
it's a lot of cash flow.
A lot of things, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of
you
cash
have this whole proliferation of new TV shows because all of these streaming services just want content.
Now, going back to the mall experience and feeling outdoors, that's one of the things at Hilltop Mall. So if you're not familiar with Hilltop Mall in Richmond, that's a dead mall, and so many people have been, like local people living in and around Richmond, they go to Emeryville, which is about a 25 minute drive. They go to Concord, about the same distance.
Or Walnut Creek
to go shopping. They don't go to Hilltop.
Open air, walkable boutique environment.
So the new company that basically bought Hilltop Mall maybe a few years ago, they've been working on a remodel, but their whole idea, the concept on this remodel is essentially to make an open feeling type through this mall where you can walk through. They have vegetation throughout the interior.
In fact, I met with the owners of the Hilltop Mall in person, and as well as that one meeting that we went to together. And again, the vision that they're trying to do is create a big experience. In fact, one of the things they even wanted to do was potentially put a hospital close by and make it a destination spot so that, for example, you can go there and do grocery store shopping as well as buying, Victoria's Secrets, which is one of the retailers they were trying to shoot for. Again, that's aside from the fact that I don't think they're doing so well right now because I guess you could buy that stuff online. But the main thing they were going for was the walkable experience, restaurants, coffee shops, and things that you would go to every week, like grocery stores, as opposed to like one-time purchases for shoes and things of that nature.
Now, what you'll also see on the news is Concord. So Concord's going through a big rent debate. Concord's had a rent mediation board for quite a while now. However, a lot of tenant groups are now pushing, and they've been pushing actually for a while, but they're pushing to get rent control in place. And so that's a big debate. There's been lots of things going on with the city council, including a few people coming on and off in election. And just, it's been a big battle, and it's one of the biggest battles out there when it comes to rent control. Now, there's also a statewide rent control assembly bill out there that passed the state assembly. It's with the Senate right now, going through discussions. And so rent control is a hot topic. Now, what many people don't know is that if the state passes rent control statewide, a city like Concord could pass their own rent control initiative that's stricter than the statewide statewide law. So here's a very interesting Concord poll that they did, and this was 2018. 75% of tenants fear eviction, 93% fear rent hikes, 80% have had hikes in the last 2 years. Now, this is what makes me question this actual poll. They said 50% live with rodents and 40% live with mold, which that just seems extremely high because once you report as a tenant to the city. If you actually took those
numbers and you apply them, you would think we're still living in the Middle Ages or like the Dark Ages. The Black Plague, 50% with rodents.
Yeah, I mean, once a tenant reports that to the city, I mean, any city comes down with the violation notice, and then they want to see proof. They want to inspect a unit. And so for tenants to say that, or for them to say that 50% live with rodents, 40% live with mold, there's definitely an error in those numbers.
Yeah, again, we were just speaking anecdotally about this, but again, when we manage properties, a lot of times we'll realize as tenants are just not good housekeepers. In fact, they'll report things like mold on their windowsill when in fact it's just they haven't cleaned or wiped it down, because it's very specific, the mold that they're talking about, this black mold that causes all kinds of breathing issues. And
well, many people don't know that there's over 100 different types of mold, and only 2 or 3 are extremely dangerous. And in fact, we live with mold every single day.
We eat mold all the time, like
exactly,
cheese.
Exactly. And so just because there's mold, it doesn't really mean that it's harmful, or it doesn't even mean that it is the black mold that people should be worried about. So there's a lot of miseducation, misconception, and it's gotten to a point in this society where once someone hears the word mold, people freak out. Now
I think their numbers are really a big red herring.
Yeah. Now at the same time, there are legitimate cases, but these numbers are definitely off. Now, going back to Concord rent control, though, these are the numbers that the tenant groups are using and pushing in order to, I guess, argue the case for rent control. But again, going back to the previous episodes where we've talked about rent control, is that there's no proof, no evidence that rent control actually helps. It helps the people currently living inside of the units by restricting future rent increases. It does nothing to affect the future tenant that moves into Concord because they're going to be paying market rent at that point.
In fact, we spoke about this before too. It's got to be a balanced equation because rent control only seeks to protect one group, whereas it doesn't necessarily address the fact that property taxes go up every year with different bonds or measures. Like, for example, the big mega bill we were just talking about earlier. If that gets passed, there's going to have to be some way to pay for it, and usually it's special assessments that are passed on to property owners. Can all these things create operations of a building or increase operational cost of building? And if they're not keeping up with the income, then the landlord finds themselves upside down and actually makes it difficult to correct things like mold or rodents and things of that nature. And again, that's kind of why they're citing it. They're saying, oh, they should have rent control because we live in bad conditions. When again, when we were bringing out, it's a red herring, not to mention it's in order to correct those types of issues, we shouldn't cap the income, the increase of rents.
And one of the problems with capping rents is you're basically capping the free market. And one thing that's when you start having government messing around with the free markets, you start to see a lot of problems that are very hard to predict 50 to 100 years down the road.
Speaking of that, rent control is actually unconstitutional. It's just that nobody's willing to tackle that simple fact that it's very unconstitutional act.
That's a good point. Okay. So Brian, it's been actually a pretty slow week with a lot of hot real estate issues. So we kind of don't have anything on this fourth segment to talk about.
This next segment is just real estate. We're going to try to talk about things outside of real estate. Anything goes except for a real estate topic. So I'll go first. We're getting ready to go to Comic-Con San Diego here in the next couple of weeks again.
When are you doing that?
It's going to be July. I think it's the week of July 15th, 16th, and 17th. It's Wednesday through Sunday.
Isn't there a special raffle to get the tickets for that?
You have to sign up a year in advance, and then you have to log in online when they send you the special email that says you can now buy tickets, and they give you a specific date, usually a Saturday morning. The tickets go for sale at 8 a.m. and you got to be in this electronic line, which usually sells out all the tickets before 9:15 or 9:20 a.m. So it's quite an arduous thing. But again, this is not the regular old Comic-Con. It's the big San Diego International Comic-Con that you always see in like EA or all of these big previews, especially now with this proliferation of fantasy and superhero movies and TV shows.
I went to a Comic-Con I've actually been to two, but they're smaller ones. I went to one in Concord, which was done at some hotel. It was
really?
The Diamond Hotel or something like that. And they just rented like a few rooms downstairs, and that was it. And so that was cool because that was actually the first time, and we took my stepson there, and he had a blast. I mean, people dressed up, and it was a cool spot. Then the second time was up in Sacramento, where there was like some abandoned warehouses that you can rent out, and they did this big kind of Comic-Con thing, which was cool, but at the same time, it's not like San Diego.
No. In fact, when you go to
San Diego is right there at the convention center.
It is.
That's a gas lamp right there.
When you go to Comic-Cons in like San Francisco or Concord or Sacramento, they're cool for like a day because you're like, all of it takes place inside a convention hall. But what's special about the one in San Diego is that, number one, it's international. So it's a huge convention hall, but literally the entire gas lamp district for 4 or 5 blocks out turns into a big Comic-Con Mardi Gras party. So for myself, like I've been going, I think 7 years now, and then taking my daughter for the last 5. We'll get dressed up in cosplay. But what I find best about it is because walking around the whole convention hall for a day or two gets kind of old, but I like the after parties, both the public and the private. And so there's always advertised different public parties. Like MTV for the last several years has had big open air concerts that are literally like concert quality parties. And then there's also little private parties that they'll have. And it's kind of like being a teenager again and trying to get into parties that you're not supposed to get into. Like I've had the privilege of getting into the Sharknado 2 private party and a bunch of other parties like the Assassin's Creed party, where you're like getting in there with other actors and things like that. And it's in the evening and it could be a pretty cool experience. But, so that's what I'm gearing up for in the next couple of weeks. In fact,
when is that again?
Middle of July. I have it in my calendar here somewhere, but I think it's July 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th. I could be wrong with that.
Oh my God, I may have to join you down in San Diego for like a day or something.
Oh no, you're welcome.
We're gonna be down in Anaheim.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. In fact, we just booked our hotel ticket, and so if you want to come in and crash and just try to jump into the experience, because again, you don't even have to have tickets to enjoy the whole Comic-Con San Diego experience, because like I said, the entire town for 4 blocks outside of the convention hall turns into a party. So you're walking around in the streets of the Gaslamp district, which is really great for the nightlife, and all throughout that week, it's just all kinds of cool venues and events and private parties and public parties and cool swag and just a really cool experience.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I'll be in Anaheim during that exact same period, because we'll be going to a band event for Cooper, but then we're gonna go down to Disneyland and check out the Star Wars Galaxy Edge.
Good luck. Yeah, I definitely wanted to check that out. 16 acres.
You have to buy separate tickets for that, which is kind of BS. Yeah. But at the same time,
and aren't all the rides right now like 3-hour waits?
Something like that. Yeah, but I'm kind of excited for that. And to be honest,
I'm excited for you for that.
That's probably the only thing I'm going to do at Disneyland is just spend the entire day just there and checking it out.
Yeah,
actually,
definitely.
We're going to be there for 2 or 3 days. So
the pictures and the commercials that I've seen just are amazing. I mean, it's supposed to be a whole immersive experience.
You could build your own lightsaber too, and someone built like a $200 lightsaber.
Wow! So I've got a $450 lightsaber.
Really?
It's a combat saber. One of these ones you can literally hit each other with. And in fact, there's entire groups out there that have these combat sabers with special effects, and they're heavy, and it's basically fencing, I think it's, what is that, Aikido, that Japanese sword.
Oh yeah, Aikido. Yeah.
Except that it's with lightsabers, so it gets pretty athletic and all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty cool thing.
I'll have to dress up like a Star Wars Sith Lord and join you at the next Comic-Con then.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
We definitely got to do that. In fact, you should probably sign up for an account so you could get in line to potentially get a ticket for next year.
Sounds good. Okay, so now we're going to get into our building analysis.
So for this week's building analysis, this is a property that is not on the market. It's a 40-unit apartment complex in the city of San Pablo. And ironically enough, this was a property that I first got sold back in 1999 and then resold back in 2004. And just a little bit about the property. Let me open up my screen here. It's 40 units comprised of 8 one-bedrooms, 24 two-bedrooms, and 8 three-bedroom units. Now, I started calling up old clients because from these videos that we're doing, I've actually had syndication companies or equity firms come out and give me a call specifically saying, hey, we see that you've syndicated properties. We have $5 million or up to place as equity, pari passu with you. We're looking for 8% preferred returns and an internal rate of return of 20% over a 5-year period, meaning they want to be able to sell out in 5 years. I'm not going to get into all the dialogue behind that, but this was the impetus behind calling up these old clients. And so the clients, they are interested in potentially reselling the property. The price is not completely set yet, but they're talking somewhere between 13 million to 14 million. So I haven't gotten all of the latest information on the property. So I'm kind of basing this on old information that I had from 2004 and what I know market rents to be right now. And based on that, let me just open up my trusty spreadsheet here. Again, I'm just kind of applying market rents of about $2.60 a square foot over the existing units. And I'm currently using a number of about $97,240 a month of income. I haven't gotten the information yet, but based on the price points that the owner was telling me, I'm just kind of extrapolating the income and then what the expenses are. So most of the expenses should pretty much be similar to what I understand about the property from years past, with the exception of inflation. And so when you apply that along with the new ad valorem tax rate, for those of you who don't know, the ad valorem tax rate is a property tax rate specific to each city. And I always advise any of my clients or agents, when they're looking at tax rates, look up the public records, the assessor's parcel number of that specific property, find its ad valorem as well as its bonds and assessments, because that one doesn't change. And so I've applied all of these expenses, and I'm using about a 38.23% of that income as expenses after applying a 5% vacancy factor. Now, I know this property over several years, and it probably doesn't even have a 5% vacancy. But again, for underwriting purposes, it's important to use the same vacancy factor that a bank would use to determine how much debt the property could service. And this is regardless of the fact that the actual Bay Area vacancy might really be like 2%. The banks, they're conservative, they have the money, so unless you're going to buy the property all cash, I'd advise use what the banks are using to underwrite property. So that all said, if we're looking at an income of $97,240 and taking 95% of that number as its effective income, applying its income from laundry, then instead of using an annual income of $1,166,000 a year, we're actually going to use a discounted effective income of $1,118,000 a year. And this is based on the point of buying the property at $12,500,000, which is kind of a happy medium from what the owner just anecdotally threw out as a number that they might be looking at. Now, based on that and these expenses that I generated, I'm getting the property coming in at about a 5.5 cap rate. That means if my calculations are right, and that after all expenses subtracted from the income, I'm getting a net operating income of about $690,600 a year, and I use a $12,500,000 sales price, then I'm looking at about a 5.53 cap rate. Subsequently, when I apply debt to this property and I take 70% loan to value on a $12,500,000 loan, and I apply what I believe to be an interest rate applicable to borrowing $8,750,000. So in this case, I'm using 4.125. In prior episodes, as we discussed some of these more expensive properties where you're commanding a debt of in excess of $3 or $4 million, $5 million and higher, what a lot of people don't realize is that the rates tend to drop. So whereas you might be paying 4.5 to 4.8 for a loan of like $1 million or even higher for a loan of $700,000, the higher you go, $5 million on up, the rates tend to drop. So even using a 4.125 interest rate to determine the debt service coverage ratio, that's a little bit conservative as well, because you could actually get it as close to as low as 3.9. Now, if I apply all those factors, you're looking at an income property that, from the start, if these numbers I'm estimating are correct, a property that should command a 1.36% debt service coverage ratio. For those of you who haven't watched previous episodes, what that essentially means is that the proposed monthly payment, in this case for borrowing a loan of for borrowing $8,750,000 at a 4.1 rate amortized over 30 years, which is $42,406 a month, the net operating income would be 136% greater than that number. Lenders in this field are typically looking for just a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio, or the net operating income to be 120% of the proposed debt. So here you have a pretty healthy debt service coverage. Now, depending upon what the owner actually agrees to sell the property for and what my client actually pays for the property, that debt service coverage can go down. But so long as it stays above the 1.2 or greater, then it's a potential for a syndication, especially if it's a group of limited partners who are coming up with the majority of the down payment, and they still want to be able to see a preferred return on their equity outside of just the return after paying off the mortgage, then again, not to get too complicated, because I'm beginning to realize I am getting a little complicated here. It finds the property has a lot of potential upside, right? Now, again, I had kept earlier I had brought up about people preferred equity, people looking for an 8% preferred return, meaning an 8% on their equity or down payment, but also seeing a 20% over a period of time, right? Now, this 20% or internal rate of return is making at least 20% on their initial investment over in this case, a 5-year period of time. So to calculate that, what I'm typically doing is I'm applying rental increases. Now, again, we've talked about in previous episodes how it looks like statewide rent control is looming over us. And what's currently on the table, or has been passed at least legislatively, and is making its way down the chain, is a 7% annual rental increase plus a CPI. So that puts you at an average of 8%, 9%, maybe even as high as 10% annual rental increases. So I apply that to my monthly income that I'm estimating. And in this case, I'm using an annual increase of 8% a year. So 8% starting in 2019, 2020, all the way up to 2022. And what happens when I overlay that type of a rental increase over a 5-year period is, as my rents begin to climb, and my net operating income also subsequently climbs, provided that the market cap stays between a 5.5 or a 5% cap rate. Again, that means that investors at the time are willing to make 5% to 5.5% on their money. Then applying an 8% annual rental increase over a 5-year period of time could potentially have an unrealized capital gain on the property of about $4.9 million. That means if the purchase price or cost basis is at around $12.5 million, then just these little 8% rental increases over a 4-year period can potentially gain an equity as high as $4,961,000, or meaning that the value of the property has gone up to $17,461,000. So when I'm looking at all these different factors, and working with different clients, I'm always looking for an entry strategy, meaning that they're coming in at a return that would be comparable to what they reasonable for what an investor should expect. But also, when you have limited partners looking to be able to exit in 5 years and make an internal rate of return of 20%, then I'm tracking that unrealized gain of equity over that period of time as we're increasing rents. So how do I keep that simple?
Do you have an estimate for the internal rate?
Well, if you have an unrealized gain of $4,961,000, then depending upon how that equity is cut, it's very easy to meet a 20% internal rate of return. Because if you figure that the investors are coming in the beginning at $12.5 million, then putting a 30% down payment plus closing costs, they're coming in roughly with $4 million. So over a 5-year period, they want to see a 20% to 22% return on their $4 million.
So in this example, they would make 100% return.
They would exceed what they're looking for, right? And again, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the whole thing, because whenever you have limited partners, there's always going to be a general partner or sponsor.
There's taxes and other calculations.
There's taxes, other calculations, but also it's a split between the sponsor and the limited partnership coming up with the capital. So that's the story for another time, because that gets a little bit very complicated. So this was the property that we're looking at today. Hopefully, as I progress through this particular deal with the client, it leads into an actual transaction. Stay tuned for other episodes where we actually go back on properties we analyzed in previous episodes and actually show you where they're at now, meaning that the properties that I analyzed in prior episodes, my clients actually got into them, they've closed escrow, and now we're on the way to actually realizing what those actual projections are. And then this is where Marc comes in, because then he's going to make sure that every one of these expenses and expectations are met.
And this is going to be part of our case study that we're going to be putting together, some additional information, some exciting stuff that we've got going on here at BCRE and BGAM. So thank you again for watching another episode of Keeping It Realty. Thank you to East Brother Beer Company for sponsoring the show, and catch you on the next episode.